Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded city, surrounded by thousands of people, and somehow feeling completely alone. Your phone is in your hand. You check it again. Nothing. You open the conversation. You read the last message you sent. You remember the exact moment you sent it. You remember wondering whether you sounded too eager. You remember putting the phone down, trying to distract yourself, then picking it up again 5 minutes later. Still nothing. So you tell yourself a story. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they'll respond tonight. And then another thought arrives. Maybe I don't matter to them anymore. That thought hurts. So you do what the anxious mind often does when it feels powerless. You chase. You send another message. You explain yourself. You try to become more interesting. You become more available. You watch their social media. You notice who they follow. You notice when they are online. You analyze their punctuation. You analyze their silence. You analyze everything except the one thing that matters most. Why are you giving another person's attention so much control over your peace? More than 2,000 years ago, Roman and Greek philosophers faced a world without smartphones, social media, instant messages, or notifications. Yet they understood something about human nature that modern technology has only made more obvious. People have always chased what they could not control. They chased approval. They chased status. They chased affection. They chased recognition. They chased people who had already decided to walk away. And they suffered, not always because they lost someone, but because they believed losing that person meant losing something inside themselves. Consider the world of Marcus Aurelius. He was surrounded by power. He commanded armies. He occupied the highest political position in the Roman world. People wanted his attention. People wanted his approval. People wanted something from him. And yet the Stoic challenge was never to become someone whom everybody wanted. It was to become someone who could remain steady whether they were wanted or rejected. That distinction is enormous, because there are two ways to live. You can spend your life asking, how do I make them choose me? Or you can begin asking, how do I become the kind of person who does not abandon himself when someone else refuses to choose him? The first question creates dependence. The second creates freedom. And perhaps this is the uncomfortable truth you have been avoiding. You may not be suffering because they left. You may be suffering because you keep following them in your mind. They left the conversation, but you keep having it. They stopped calling, but you keep imagining what you would say if they did. They rejected you, but you keep trying to prove that they were wrong. They moved on, but you keep checking whether they have. Physically, they are gone. Psychologically, you keep carrying them. This is where Stoicism becomes more than an ancient philosophy. It becomes a weapon against emotional slavery. Epictetus taught that human freedom begins with understanding what belongs to us and what does not. Their opinion does not belong to you. Their feelings do not belong to you. Their decision does not belong to you. Their attention does not belong to you. Their affection does not belong to you, but your judgment does. Your actions do. Your character does. Your attention does, and your response does. That is where your power lives. But there is a deeper mystery. Why do intelligent people chase people who clearly do not reciprocate? Why does rejection sometimes make desire stronger? Why can one person's silence occupy an entire day inside your mind? Why do we sometimes value someone more after they become unavailable? And most importantly, what happens when you stop chasing? Not to manipulate them into coming back, but because you finally realize you were never supposed to abandon yourself to keep them. The answer begins with a lesson the Stoics understood better than most people ever will. There is a difference between loving someone and needing their love to feel valuable. There is a difference between pursuing a meaningful relationship and pursuing someone who has repeatedly shown you that they do not want the same relationship. There is a difference between making an effort and begging for reciprocity. Modern culture often confuses these things. We are told to never give up, never stop trying, fight for what you want, prove your worth, win them back. But Stoicism asks a more uncomfortable question. What if the strength you are trying to prove is actually the strength required to walk away? Walking away does not automatically mean you stopped caring. Sometimes it means you finally started caring about yourself. The Stoics were not teaching emotional coldness. They were not telling people to become incapable of love. They were teaching something far more difficult. Love without possession, care without dependency, give without demanding control, and accept reality without allowing reality to destroy your character. Seneca wrote extensively about the dangers of emotional excess and attachment. He understood that the human mind can turn a small event into an enormous internal storm. A delayed response becomes rejection. Rejection becomes humiliation. Humiliation becomes anger. Anger becomes revenge. And revenge becomes another form of attachment. You think you have moved on because you are angry, but anger can keep you chained just as effectively as affection. The person you supposedly hate is still controlling your attention. Stoic freedom is different. It says, I will not make another person's behavior the ruler of my inner world. That does not mean you stop feeling. You feel, you acknowledge, you grieve, you learn, you release. Then you return to your own life. And throughout these 10 lessons, we are going to examine exactly how to do that. We will explore why chasing destroys attraction, why rejection activates the ego, why uncertainty can become addictive, why silence can be stronger than explanation, why boundaries matter, why self-respect is behavioral rather than verbal, and why the final act of detachment is not walking away from another person. It is walking back toward yourself. And the 10th lesson may be the most important of all, because eventually you must stop asking, how do I make them miss me? And start asking, why did I ever believe their presence determined my worth? Lesson 1. Stop chasing what is running from you. Picture a man walking through an ancient marketplace. The streets are crowded. Merchants are shouting. Animals move through the narrow lanes. People negotiate over olive oil, grain, cloth, and wine. And somewhere among them is a philosopher who understands something most people do not. You cannot force another human being to value you. You can offer, you can invite, you can speak honestly, you can behave with kindness, but you cannot command another person's heart. This is one of the central realities behind Stoic thought. The Stoics constantly return to the distinction between what depends on us and what does not. That principle sounds simple until you apply it to relationships. You can control whether you send the message. You cannot control whether they answer. You can control whether you show appreciation. You cannot control whether they reciprocate. You can control whether you communicate honestly. You cannot control whether they understand you. You can control whether you remain dignified. You cannot control whether they choose you. And yet chasing begins precisely when we forget this boundary. We believe that if we try harder, explain more, give more, become more attractive, become more successful, become more available, eventually we will produce the response we want. But human beings are not machines. Affection cannot be programmed. Respect cannot be extracted. And genuine connection cannot be negotiated like a business contract. Psychologically, chasing often comes from a fear of loss. When something feels uncertain, the brain becomes preoccupied with resolving the uncertainty. That is why an inconsistent person can sometimes occupy more mental space than a consistently loving one. The uncertainty itself becomes stimulating. You are not only pursuing the person, you are pursuing an answer. Do they still care? Will they come back? What did I do wrong? What if I send one more message? And the mind keeps returning to the unfinished story. This is where you need discipline. Not discipline over them, discipline over yourself. If someone repeatedly withdraws, you do not need to chase harder. You need to observe more carefully. Their behavior is information. If someone consistently gives you minimal effort, believe the pattern. One disappointing day means little. A repeated pattern means something. Stoicism teaches us to see reality without decorating it with fantasy. That is difficult because fantasy is often more comfortable. You can tell yourself, they are just confused. They are afraid of commitment. They secretly care. They will change. Maybe they will, but your life cannot be built around possibilities that require another person to become someone they currently are not. Your responsibility is not to predict their future. It is to respond intelligently to the present. So ask yourself, where am I chasing? Where am I repeatedly initiating? Where am I explaining myself to someone who has already shown me their level of interest? Where am I trying to convince someone of my value? Because the moment you begin trying to convince someone to value you, you have already forgotten your own value. The Stoic response is not bitterness. It is withdrawal without hatred. You stop forcing. You stop begging. You stop performing. You allow reality to reveal itself. And sometimes reality says, they are not your person. That sentence may hurt, but accepting it can save you years. Because peace begins where persuasion ends. You do not need to chase what freely chooses to stay. And that leads to the next lesson, because even when you understand this intellectually, something inside you may still want their attention. Why? Because rejection does not merely hurt the heart. It threatens the ego. Lesson 2. Rejection attacks the ego, not your worth. Imagine being rejected by someone you deeply admired. The first thought may not be, we are simply incompatible. Instead, the mind says, what is wrong with me? That question changes everything. Suddenly, the rejection becomes personal. Their decision becomes a verdict. Their preference becomes a judgment of your identity. This is where the ego enters. The ego wants to believe that reality should confirm the story we have about ourselves. I am desirable. I am important. I am respected. People should choose me. When someone refuses to choose us, that story cracks, and the mind immediately wants to repair it. How? By chasing. You want them to change their mind because their changed mind would appear to restore your worth. But notice the trap. If their rejection lowers your worth, then their acceptance must be responsible for raising it. That means you have handed them authority over your identity. Epictetus understood the danger of allowing external judgments to determine your inner condition. A person's opinion is an event. Your judgment about that opinion is another event. Those are not the same thing. Someone can say you are unimportant. That statement exists outside you. You then decide whether it becomes a belief. That second step is where your freedom lives. Think about Cato the Younger. He lived during one of Rome's most turbulent political periods and became famous for his commitment to principles, particularly his resistance to what he saw as the destruction of the Roman Republic. Cato's life demonstrates something useful here. A person can be disliked, opposed, criticized, defeated politically, and still refuse to surrender his internal standard. That is the mindset you need after rejection. Not, how can I make them regret rejecting me? But what kind of person will I be regardless of their decision? That is a much stronger question, because revenge is still dependence. If your goal is to become successful so that an old partner sees you and regrets leaving, you may become successful, but they are still living inside your motivation. If you become physically stronger so that someone notices, they still occupy your mind. If you become wealthy to prove something, they still have a seat at the table. The person may be absent, but your ego keeps inviting them back. Real transformation happens when you remove them from the equation. You exercise because you respect your body. You build your career because you have a purpose. You cultivate friendships because human connection matters. You study because knowledge expands your mind. You become disciplined because you refuse to live as a slave to impulses. Your life becomes yours again. And there is another psychological trap here. The mind often overestimates the uniqueness of the person who rejected us. You may think, I will never find someone like them. Of course, you will not find someone exactly like them. No human being is replaceable in the literal sense. But that does not mean they were your only possibility for love, friendship, connection, or meaning. You are grieving a specific relationship. Do not turn that grief into a prophecy about your entire future. Give yourself time. Let the wound exist without building an identity around it. You were valuable before they arrived. You were valuable while they were present. You remain valuable after they leave. Their decision changed the relationship. It did not change your human worth. And once you understand that, rejection loses one of its most dangerous powers. It can hurt you without defining you. Someone's inability or unwillingness to choose you is not evidence that you were unworthy of being chosen. But there is another reason people keep chasing. Sometimes it is not rejection. Sometimes it is uncertainty. And uncertainty can be even more addictive. Lesson 3, do not confuse uncertainty with love. There is a strange phenomenon in human psychology. When someone is consistently kind to us, we may appreciate them. But when someone alternates between affection and distance, the emotional intensity can become enormous. One day they are warm. The next day they disappear. Then they return. Then they become distant again. You never know what you are going to get. And suddenly, you are thinking about them constantly. You may call it chemistry. You may call it passion. You may call it destiny. But sometimes it is simply uncertainty. The brain hates incomplete patterns. When an outcome is unpredictable, attention increases. This is one reason unpredictable rewards can become so psychologically compelling. The same principle can appear in social media. You refresh a page because perhaps there will be a notification. You check a message because perhaps they replied. You look at their story because perhaps they posted something meaningful. The reward is not guaranteed, and because it is not guaranteed, you keep checking. This is how attention becomes captivity. The ancient Stoics would have recognized the broader problem even without modern neuroscience. They warned against allowing external things to become the source of our emotional stability. If your happiness depends on whether someone responds, you are no longer simply enjoying a relationship. You are outsourcing your emotional state. Consider the Stoic discipline of examining impressions. Epictetus taught students to question their first reactions rather than immediately obey them. When your mind says, "They are ignoring me because they do not care," pause. That is an impression, not necessarily a fact. Then the mind says, "I need to message them." Pause again. That is an impulse, not an order. This tiny gap between feeling and action is where self-control begins. You do not have to obey every emotional command. If you feel the urge to send another message, wait. If you want to check their profile, wait. If you want to post something designed to make them jealous, stop. Ask, what outcome am I trying to manufacture? If the answer is attention, validation, jealousy, or reassurance, you are probably acting from insecurity rather than strength. A Stoic does not ask, what action will get the reaction I want? He asks, sometimes the person never apologizes. Sometimes they never understand. Sometimes they tell the story differently. Sometimes you will never receive the explanation you wanted, and your peace cannot depend on receiving it. Seneca's philosophical writings repeatedly return to the question of how we should respond to circumstances that are outside our control. The answer is not passivity, it is intelligent action followed by acceptance. Say what is necessary, do what is honorable, then release the outcome. This principle is especially powerful in the age of social media. You do not need to post your pain. You do not need to make someone jealous. You do not need to demonstrate that you are happier. You do not need to upload evidence that you have moved on. If you truly have moved on, you will not need to advertise it to the person you supposedly moved on from. Let your life become the message. Let your silence be peaceful rather than strategic. Let your improvement happen privately. There is a dignity that appears when you stop explaining every movement of your heart. People may misunderstand you. Let them. Your responsibility is not to control every interpretation. Your responsibility is to live according to your values. Sometimes the strongest response is not the perfect sentence. It is the decision not to send another one. And once you stop explaining yourself, you begin to notice something else. Your boundaries were never about controlling them. They were about controlling your participation. Lesson 5. Boundaries are not walls. They are decisions. A boundary is often misunderstood. People think a boundary means telling another person what they are allowed to do. But a real boundary is about what you will do. You cannot control whether someone lies. You can control whether you continue trusting them. You cannot control whether someone repeatedly cancels plans. You can control whether you keep making yourself available. You cannot control whether someone disrespects you. You can control whether you remain in situations where disrespect has become a pattern. This distinction is deeply Stoic. You cannot command the external world, but you can govern your own choices. Musonius Rufus, one of the important teachers of Roman Stoicism, emphasized philosophy as something to be practiced through daily behavior. Wisdom was not merely an intellectual exercise. It had to appear in the way a person lived. That means self-respect must eventually become behavior. You can say, "I deserve better." But if you repeatedly return to situations that violate your values, the sentence remains decoration. The Stoic question is, what action demonstrates my principle? Imagine someone who repeatedly contacts you only when they need something. Every time they disappear, you forgive them. Every time they return, you become available. Eventually, the pattern becomes predictable. You have taught them what access to you requires. This does not mean you should become harsh. You can be compassionate without being endlessly accessible. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can understand someone's pain without volunteering to be damaged by it. This is particularly important in relationships because empathy can become self-neglect. You understand why they behave badly. Maybe they had a difficult childhood. Maybe they fear intimacy. Maybe they are struggling. All of that may be true, but explanation is not obligation. Understanding someone does not require tolerating everything they do. The Stoics believed that human beings are social creatures. Stoicism does not tell you to become isolated. It teaches you to participate in relationships according to reason and virtue. Justice, temperance, courage, wisdom. These virtues can exist inside relationships. Courage may mean having a difficult conversation. Justice may mean treating someone fairly. Temperance may mean refusing to become emotionally dependent. Wisdom may mean recognizing when the relationship is no longer healthy. And sometimes love requires distance. That sounds paradoxical. But imagine holding a burning object because you love it. Love does not make the object safe to hold. Reality remains reality. The same is true of people. You can care deeply about someone and still recognize that proximity is damaging. The boundary becomes, "I wish you well, but I cannot continue participating in this pattern." Then you follow through. No dramatic speech required. No revenge. No public announcement. No attempt to punish. Just a decision. And decisions become powerful when repeated. Every time you refuse to chase, you strengthen your self-command. Every time you resist the urge to seek validation, you strengthen your identity. Every time you walk away from disrespect, you teach yourself that your principles matter. Eventually, something changes. You stop asking whether they will come back. You start asking whether you would even let them back into the same position. That is growth. And this leads to an uncomfortable truth about self-respect. You cannot build it through words. You build it through what you repeatedly tolerate. Lesson 6. Your self-respect is built in private. Nobody sees most of the decisions that build your character. Nobody sees when you put the phone down. Nobody sees when you refuse to check their profile. Nobody sees when you choose sleep over another night of overthinking. Nobody sees when you return to your work instead of waiting for a message. Nobody sees the moment you feel the urge to chase and decide not to. But those invisible moments are where your identity is being constructed. Marcus Aurelius wrote personal reflections in his meditations, not as a public performance, but as a form of self-examination. That detail matters. He was reminding himself how to live. He was not simply trying to impress an audience. There is something powerful about that. Your deepest transformation usually begins when nobody is watching. Think about discipline. You do not become disciplined when everyone applauds your routine. You become disciplined when there is no applause. You do not become emotionally strong when you never feel pain. You become emotionally strong when pain arrives and you refuse to surrender your judgment. You do not become detached when you stop loving people. You become detached when you can love without demanding possession. This is why chasing is so damaging. It trains you to seek your emotional reward externally. Their message becomes the reward. Their attention becomes the reward. Their approval becomes the reward. Their return becomes the reward. And gradually your brain learns, I feel good when they choose me. The solution is not to become emotionally numb. The solution is to create other sources of meaning, purpose, work, friendship, learning, physical health, creativity, service, spiritual reflection, contribution. When your life contains nothing except one person's attention, losing that attention feels like losing everything. But when your life is built around many meaningful pillars, one person's departure becomes painful without becoming catastrophic. This is why Stoicism is ultimately about building an inner structure strong enough to withstand external change. Imagine a Roman temple. Its beauty is visible, but what keeps it standing is the architecture beneath the surface. Your character is the same. Your visible confidence is not the foundation. Your private habits are. If you say you value yourself, but spend every night checking whether someone has viewed your story, your behavior is telling you something. Do not shame yourself. Observe yourself. That is the Stoic approach. You do not need hatred. You need honesty. Ask, what am I repeatedly doing that keeps me emotionally attached? Maybe you are rereading old messages. Maybe you are checking photographs. Maybe you are visiting places associated with them. Maybe you are asking mutual friends about them. Maybe you are imagining future conversations. Maybe you are creating imaginary scenarios in which they finally understand what they lost. Notice the pattern, then interrupt it. Not once, repeatedly. Attention is like a muscle. What you repeatedly direct it toward becomes stronger. If you continually direct attention towards someone who is absent, their psychological presence becomes stronger. If you redirect attention toward your own life becomes stronger. This does not happen overnight, but it happens. And one day you will notice that you went an entire morning without thinking about them. Then an entire afternoon, then a week. The memory remains, but it no longer commands you. That is freedom. Self-respect is not what you say about yourself. It is what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. And once your private life begins changing, something even more powerful happens. Your attention returns. Lesson 7, reclaim your attention. Your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. Money can be earned again. Possessions can be replaced. Time cannot. And yet we give our attention away casually to notifications, arguments, celebrity drama, social media, other people's opinions, and especially to people who have stopped giving us theirs. The ancient Stoics had a different relationship with attention. They repeatedly reminded themselves to focus on what was within their sphere of action. Marcus Aurelius often brought himself back from distraction to the task immediately in front of him. That practice is surprisingly modern, because today attention is under constant attack. Every application wants a piece of it. Every notification interrupts it. Every algorithm learns what keeps you emotionally engaged. And nothing is more engaging than uncertainty. That is why checking whether someone has responded can become compulsive. You are not merely checking a phone. You are checking for emotional resolution. But every check teaches your mind, this person is important enough to interrupt my life. So reclaim the interruption. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Remove the conversation from your immediate view. Stop checking their online status. Do not monitor their activity. If necessary, mute or unfollow them. Not because you hate them, because you are protecting your attention. There is nothing immature about removing a stimulus that repeatedly destabilizes you. If someone has already left your physical life, do not keep inviting them into your digital life every 5 minutes. Then replace the habit. This part is critical. You cannot simply remove obsession and leave a vacuum. The mind needs somewhere to go. Create a morning routine. Read, exercise, work deeply, learn something difficult, spend time with people who actually show up. Build something. When the urge to check their profile appears, use it as a signal. Do not think, I must not think about them. That usually makes the thought louder. Instead say, I notice the urge, I do not have to obey it. Then return to your task. This is emotional regulation in practice. You are not suppressing the feeling. You are allowing it to exist without giving it control. That distinction matters. Suppression says, I shouldn't feel this. Regulation says, I feel this and I can still choose my action. That is Stoic strength. Epictetus did not promise that difficult impressions would never appear. The goal was to learn how to respond to them intelligently. You can feel anxious and still act calmly. You can feel rejected and still behave with dignity. You can miss someone and still continue your life. You can feel anger without sending the message. That small separation between emotion and action is the birthplace of freedom. And eventually, you discover something surprising. The person you were chasing was not always the real object of your obsession. Sometimes you were chasing the feeling you believed they could give you. Validation, security, status, belonging, excitement. The second house has many pillars. One is damaged, the structure remains. Your emotional life should work the same way. A relationship can be an important part of your life, but it should not become the entire architecture of your identity. This is one of the most practical lessons in emotional resilience. Do not simply try to stop chasing someone. Build a life that makes chasing unnecessary. That means having goals that existed before them, and goals that will exist after them. Your body, your career, your finances, your friendships, your family, your education, your spiritual life, your creativity, your contribution, your character. When these areas become meaningful, the mind stops treating one relationship as the center of existence. Seneca wrote extensively about time and how easily human beings waste it. The tragedy is not merely that life is short. It is that we often give away large portions of it while believing we are waiting for life to begin. When they come back, I'll be happy. When they apologize, I'll move on. When they choose me, I'll feel enough. No, life is already happening. Today is not a waiting room. Your life cannot be placed on hold until another person resolves your emotions. This is where purpose becomes medicine. Not because purpose erases pain. It gives pain somewhere to go. Take the energy you used to chase and redirect it. If you spent an hour checking their profile, spend an hour learning. If you spent energy composing messages, compose plans. If you spent nights imagining conversations, imagine the life you want to build. If you wanted them to see you succeed, succeed for a reason larger than their regret. This is not about becoming obsessed with productivity. Stoicism is not a command to work until you collapse. Rest matters. Friendship matters. Pleasure matters. Beauty matters. But all of them become healthier when they are chosen rather than used as distractions. Build a life you actually want to inhabit. Then something remarkable happens. You no longer need someone to return in order to feel that your story has a happy ending. If they return, you can evaluate calmly. If they do not, you continue. That is the difference between desire and dependency. Desire says, I would welcome this. Dependency says, I cannot be okay without this. The first preserves freedom. The second creates fear. And when fear controls a relationship, you often accept things you would never accept from anyone else. You forgive repeatedly. You tolerate inconsistency. You silence your needs. You become smaller. You become easier to keep, but harder to respect. Never make yourself smaller to preserve someone else's access to you. The right relationship does not require you to abandon your dignity. And the right life does not require you to wait for someone else to validate it. Build your foundation. Strengthen your pillars. Then love becomes something you share rather than something you beg for. And this brings us to the final lesson. Because even after you stop chasing, rebuild your life and regain your attention, there is one final attachment you must release. The desire for them to regret losing you. Lesson 10. The final freedom is not making them regret losing you. This is where many people stop halfway. They say, I don't chase anymore. But secretly, they still hope the other person watches from a distance. They hope the other person sees their success. They hope they become jealous. They hope they come back. They hope one day the person says, I made a mistake. It is understandable, but it is not complete freedom, because you are still waiting for a reaction. You have stopped chasing physically, but psychologically, you are still standing at the door, waiting, watching, hoping. Stoicism asks you to go one step further. Release the need for the ending. to validate the story. Maybe they regret it. Maybe they do not. Maybe they remember you fondly. Maybe they don't. Maybe they understand what they lost. Maybe they never understand. You do not know, and you do not need to know. This is where the discipline of acceptance becomes profound. The goal is not to make reality match your preferred narrative. The goal is to become strong enough to live well within reality as it is. Marcus Aurelius lived through war, political instability, personal loss, illness, and enormous responsibility. His philosophy was not built on the fantasy that life would always cooperate. It was built on preparation for the opposite. Life changes. People change. Bodies change. Fortunes change. Relationships change. Your task is not to prevent change. Your task is to remain honorable while change happens. Think about the person you have been chasing. For a moment, remove the emotion. See them simply as another human being. They have fears, desires, contradictions, strengths, weaknesses, their own history, their own choices, their own freedom. You do not need to turn them into a villain to leave. That is important, because hatred can become another chain. If you spend years saying, "They were terrible. They ruined everything. I hope they suffer," then they are still occupying your mind. Freedom is quieter. You can say, "That relationship mattered to me. It taught me something. It hurt me. It ended. And now I choose to continue." No revenge, no performance, no obsession, no final speech, just acceptance. This is what emotional maturity looks like. You stop needing them to suffer for your pain to be legitimate. You stop needing them to apologize before you heal. You stop needing them to return before you feel complete. You stop needing them to regret their decision before you trust your own value. And perhaps the greatest transformation is this. You become grateful that you survived the version of yourself who believed love required self-abandonment. You become grateful for the lesson, not because the pain was pleasant, but because you became wiser through it. The Stoics never promised that suffering would feel good. They asked whether suffering could be used as material for character. A difficult experience can become bitterness, or it can become wisdom. A rejection can become insecurity, or it can become self-knowledge. A breakup can become obsession, or it can become independence. A person's departure can become the beginning of your collapse, or the beginning of your return to yourself. You decide, not once, every day, and someday you may look back at the person you once desperately wanted and realize something extraordinary. You did not lose your life when they left. You found it. The greatest victory is not making someone regret losing you. It is becoming so at peace with yourself that their regret is no longer relevant. Walk away without losing yourself. Now take a breath. Think about everything we have explored. You were never truly being asked to stop caring. You were being asked to stop abandoning yourself. There is a difference. You can care without chasing. You can love without begging. You can miss someone without returning. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can remember without reliving. You can feel pain without turning pain into identity. This is the Stoic path, not emotional numbness, emotional command. Remember the first lesson. Stop chasing what is running from you. You cannot force another person's heart. You can only control your own conduct. Then remember the second. Rejection attacks the ego, not your worth. Their decision is not a measurement of your human value. Then the third. Do not confuse uncertainty with love. Sometimes what feels like intense chemistry is simply the mind becoming addicted to unpredictability. Then the fourth. Silence becomes powerful when you have nothing left to prove. You do not need the final word to preserve your dignity. Then the fifth. Boundaries are decisions about your participation. You cannot control what others do. You can control what you continue to accept. Then the sixth. Self-respect is built in private. Every small decision matters. Every time you resist the impulse to chase, you are training yourself to trust yourself. Then the seventh. Reclaim your attention. Your attention is your life in miniature. Where it goes repeatedly, your life follows. Then the eighth. Stop trying to control their perception of you. You cannot live peacefully while managing an imaginary audience. Then the ninth. Build a life that does not require their return. Give yourself more than one pillar, more than one source of meaning, more than one reason to wake up. And finally, the 10th, stop needing them to regret losing you. Because that is where the deepest freedom begins. You do not need revenge. You do not need applause. You do not need their apology. You do not need their message. You do not need their jealousy. You do not need their return. You need yourself. That does not mean you become cold. It means you become whole. And there is something beautiful about becoming whole again. You begin to walk differently. You no longer stare at your phone waiting for someone to decide your emotional state. You no longer measure your worth by who chooses you. You no longer interpret every silence as rejection. You no longer feel compelled to explain every decision. You begin to trust your own judgment. You begin to enjoy your own company. You begin to protect your peace. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the person you were chasing becomes less important. Not because they became less human, because you became more present in your own life. This is the paradox. When you stop chasing people, you do not necessarily lose them. Sometimes they return, sometimes they don't. But either way, you win something more important. You recover your freedom, and freedom is worth more than being chosen by someone who cannot choose you consistently. So if someone is pulling away, let them. If someone does not value your presence, stop forcing your presence into their life. If someone repeatedly gives you crumbs, stop convincing yourself that crumbs are a feast. If someone wants to leave, do not turn their departure into a war. Wish them well, then turn around. Walk toward your own life. There will be mornings when you still miss them. Let yourself miss them. There will be nights when memories return. Let them come. There will be moments when you wonder what might have happened if you had tried harder. Then remind yourself, you are not responsible for controlling another person's choice. You are responsible for the quality of your own. And perhaps tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself one question. Where in my life am I still chasing something that has already shown me it does not want to stay? Do not answer quickly. Sit with it. Maybe it is a person. Maybe it is approval. Maybe it is status. Maybe it is an old version of yourself. Maybe it is a future that no longer exists. Whatever it is, look at it honestly. Then ask a second question. What would my life look like if I stopped chasing and started choosing myself? Not selfishly, not arrogantly, but deliberately. What would you do with the hours you currently spend waiting? What would you build with the energy you currently spend wondering? Who would you become if you stopped trying to prove that you were worth loving and started living as though your worth were already established? Imagine waking tomorrow morning with no need to check who replied, no need to inspect who viewed your story, no need to wonder whether they miss you, no need to manufacture jealousy, no need to explain your silence. You simply wake up, you breathe, you stand, you work, you train, you learn, you love the people who genuinely love you, you serve something larger than your ego, you protect your attention, you accept what you cannot change, and you give your best effort to what remains within your control. That is not loneliness, that is sovereignty. The ancient Stoics understood that the strongest person is not the person who controls everyone around him. It is the person who no longer needs to. So let them go if they must go. Let the unanswered message remain unanswered. Let the relationship remain in the past. Let the explanation remain incomplete. Let their opinion belong to them. Let their choice belong to them. And take back what has always belonged to you. Your attention, your judgment, your character, your time, your future, your peace. Because the day you stop chasing someone is not necessarily the day you stop loving them. Sometimes it is the day you finally learn how to love yourself without asking another person for permission. And if you remember only one sentence from this entire video, remember this. Never chase someone so far that you lose yourself trying to make them stay. The right people do not require you to destroy your dignity for their presence. The right relationships are built through mutual effort. And when effort becomes one-sided, wisdom means recognizing the difference between persistence and self-abandonment. So walk away with your head held high, not because you are better than them, not because you want them to suffer, not because you want them to come crawling back. Walk away because your life is too valuable to spend begging for what should be freely given. Let your silence become peace. Let your distance become clarity. Let your discipline become strength. Let your pain become wisdom. And let your future become more important than your past. You do not need to be chosen by everyone. You need to choose your values. You need to choose your character. You need to choose your peace. And once you do that consistently, something changes. You stop asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" And you begin saying, "I choose the life I am going to live." That is the moment you become free. If this message spoke to you, take a moment and write in the comments which lesson affected you the most. Your experience may help someone else who is quietly going through the same struggle. And if you want more videos on stoicism, emotional control, self-discipline, confidence, resilience, and building an unshakable mind, like this video, subscribe to Stoic Dominion and turn on notifications. Remember, you cannot control who stays. You cannot control who leaves, but you can control whether you abandon yourself when they do. And a Stoic does not chase what refuses to stay. He returns to himself and keeps walking.